The old man, shivering in the doorway of New York's most exclusive restaurant, looked like he had lost everything. His coat was torn, his boots were caked in mud, and the staff looked at him like he was a disease. They laughed. They pointed. They told him to get lost. They didn't know that the man standing in the rain wasn't a beggar. He was Lorenzo the Ghost Moretti, the ruthless head of the East Coast crime syndicate, and he was testing them. Only one person, a struggling waitress named Julian, saw a human being instead of a nuisance. When she whispered a few words in his native tongue, she didn't just earn a tip, she started a war that would burn the city to the ground. This is the story of how one act of kindness saved a life and ended a dozen others. The rain in Manhattan that Tuesday wasn't just rain, it was a punishment. It lashed against the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of Le Ciel, the kind of French fusion restaurant where a bottle of water cost more than most people's hourly wage. Inside, the air smelled of truffle oil, expensive perfume, and old money. Outside, the city was drowning in a grey, freezing downpour. Julian Ritchie adjusted her apron, wincing as she tightened the strings. Her lower back was throbbing. She had been on her feet for 10 hours straight, covering a double shift because Sarah, the hostess, had called in sick again to go to a concert in Brooklyn. Julian didn't have the luxury of fake sick days. She had rent due on the first, a maxed-out credit card, and a grandmother in a nursing home in Queens whose medication costs were rising faster than Julian's tips. "Table 4 needs a refill on the Pinot," a voice snapped behind her. Julian jumped, turning to see Brad, the floor manager. Brad was a man who wore suits that were too tight and a cologne that was too strong. He managed the restaurant with a sneer, treating the wealthy patrons like gods and the staff like insects. "I'm on it, Brad," Julian said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And fix your hair. You look like you walked here in a wind tunnel. This is Le Ciel, Julian, not a diner in Jersey," Brad hissed before spinning on his heel to greet a senator walking through the door. Julian swallowed her pride, just as she had done every day for the last 3 years. She hurried to the bar, grabbed the Pinot Noir, and made her rounds. The restaurant was buzzing. It was the height of the dinner rush. Bankers, socialites, and tourists were laughing, clinking silverware, and oblivious to the storm raging outside. Then, the heavy oak front door creaked open. A gust of wind blew rain into the pristine foyer, causing the hostess stand to shudder. Silence rippled through the front section of the dining room. Standing there was a man who looked like he had crawled out of a gutter. He was elderly, perhaps in his late 70s, hunched over with a heavy, waterlogged trench coat that had seen better decades. His grey hair was plastered to his skull, and he was trembling violently. He held a fedora in his hands, wringing the water out of the brim. The hostess, a young girl named Jessica, who was terrified of Brad, froze. She looked at the man's muddy boots on the marble floor, and panic flashed in her eyes. "Sir?" Jessica squeaked. "Sir, you can't be here." The old man looked up. His eyes were dark, obscured by the shadows of the room, but they scanned the area with a strange, predatory intensity that didn't match his frail appearance. I only wish for a table," the man said. His voice was raspy, his English broken and heavily accented. "Just soup, please, it is cold." Brad descended upon the scene like a vulture, spotting a dying animal. He marched across the dining room, his polished shoes clicking aggressively on the floor. "Excuse me," Brad's voice boomed, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. He wanted the customers to know he was protecting them from the riffraff. "This is a private establishment. We have a dress code, and we certainly don't serve vagrants." The old man didn't back down, though he shivered. "I have money," he said, reaching a shaking hand into his coat pocket. "I don't care if you have a winning lottery ticket," Brad sneered, looming over the old man. He snapped his fingers, signaling for the busboy, a large kid named Marcus. "Marcus, get the door. Escort this gentleman out before he drips mud on the Persian rug." The diners watched with amusement. A couple at table 2 snickered. "Can you believe the nerve?" a woman in pearls whispered loudly. "Ruining our appetizers with that smell." Julian watched from the service station, her heart hammering against her ribs. It was wrong. It was cruel. She looked at the old man's hands. They were calloused, shaking, and turning blue from the cold. He wasn't drunk. He was freezing. "Please," the old man tried one last time, his dignity seemingly crumbling. "Just 10 minutes, to warm up." "Out!" Brad pointed to the street. "Now!" Marcus, the busboy, looked apologetically at the man but moved to grab his arm. The old man flinched, his eyes hardening for a split second before he bowed his head in defeat. He turned to face the storm again. Julian couldn't breathe. She thought of her grandfather, who had died 2 years ago. He had been a proud man, an immigrant who worked in the shipyards. If someone had treated him like this, it would have broken him. Without thinking, ignoring the debt, ignoring the rent, ignoring the fact that Brad had threatened to fire her last week, Julian slammed the water pitcher down on the counter. "Stop!" Julian called out. The restaurant went silent again. Brad turned slowly, his face turning a shade of purple. "Excuse me, Julian." Julian walked forward, her legs shaking but her chin high. She walked past Brad, past the stunned hostess, and gently placed a hand on the old man's soaked shoulder. The fabric was freezing. "He's staying," Julian said, her voice trembling but firm. "He's sitting at my station. Table 9 is open. It's in the back corner, away from the view, so he won't bother your precious guests, Brad. But I am not letting an old man freeze to death on the sidewalk." "If you seat him," Brad hissed, leaning in close to her ear, his breath smelling of stale coffee and malice, "you are finished here. You walk out that door with him." Julian looked at the old man. He was looking at her now, really looking at her. His eyes were the color of espresso, deep and unreadable. For a second, the trembling stopped. He wasn't looking at her like a savior. He was analyzing her, assessing her value. "Then I'm finished," Julian said quietly. She turned to the old man and smiled, a genuine, warm smile that she usually saved for her family. "Come with me. Ignore him. Let's get you some hot soup." Brad stood frozen, his mouth agape. He was too shocked by the public insubordination to cause a scene right then and there, and the senator at table 4 was watching with a raised eyebrow. Brad decided to play the long game. He would let her serve the bum, and then he would fire her publicly at the end of the shift. He stepped aside, crossing his arms. "On your head be it, Ricci," Brad muttered. Julian guided the old man through the gauntlet of judgmental stares. She led him to the small, secluded booth in the back corner near the kitchen doors. It was the worst seat in the house, usually reserved for tourists who didn't tip, but tonight it was a sanctuary. She helped him off with his heavy, soaked coat, hanging it on a nearby hook. Underneath, he wore a suit that was frayed at the cuffs, but surprisingly well-tailored for a homeless man. "Sit," she said softly. "I'll bring you a warm towel first." The old man sat, his posture stiff. He watched her scurrying away to the kitchen. As soon as she was out of sight, the old man's demeanor shifted. The trembling ceased entirely. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a small burner flip phone. He glanced at the screen. No signal. He looked around the room, noting the exits, noting the number of staff, noting the location of the security cameras. This wasn't a man looking for soup. This was a man looking for a way out of a trap. But for the moment, the waitress had bought him time. Lorenzo Moretti, the capo dei capi, boss of bosses of the New York families, had been ambushed 3 blocks away. His driver was dead. His bodyguards were scattered. The Vanzetti brothers had finally made their move. Lorenzo had ditched his phone and his gun to blend in, playing the role of the vagrant to escape the hit squad sweeping the streets. He needed shelter. He needed to assess who had betrayed him, and he needed to know if this girl, this Julian, was simply an idiot or an angel. Julian returned with a steaming hot towel on a silver platter and a bowl of the chef's special lobster bisque. She didn't bother ringing it into the computer system. If she was getting fired, she was going to steal the soup. She placed the towel in the old man's hands. He took it, pressing the warmth against his face, inhaling deeply. When he lowered it, he looked less like a drowned rat and more like a tired hawk. "Thank you," he said in English, his voice still raspy. Julian poured him a glass of water. "It's horrible out there. My nonna always says the rain washes away the sins of the city, but tonight I think it's just drowning us." The old man froze. He looked up at her sharply. "Nonna?" Julian smiled, a sad, nostalgic smile. "Yes, my grandmother. She's from Sicily, Palermo." The old man's eyes narrowed. He leaned forward slightly. The ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to fade away for him. "Palermo," he repeated. "A tough place. Strong people." Julian nodded, checking to make sure Brad wasn't hovering nearby. "She raised me. She taught me that you never turn away someone who knocks on your door. The guest is God, she used to say." She hesitated, then lowered her voice, switching effortlessly from English to the dialect she had spoken in her grandmother's kitchen since she was a child. It wasn't the textbook Italian taught in schools. It was the rough, melodious Sicilian dialect of the old country. "Mangia, signore. Ti farà bene. Il freddo è nemico delle ossa vecchie. Eat, sir. It will do you good. The cold is the enemy of old bones." The effect on the old man was electric. Lorenzo Moretti had not heard that specific dialect, spoken with that specific cadence, since his mother was alive 40 years ago. In his world, the world of high-stakes racketeering, international drug trade, and boardroom murders, people spoke Italian, but it was formal, businesslike, or corrupted by American slang. This was the language of the hearth, the language of blood. He stared at her, his facade of the helpless beggar cracking completely. For a moment, the ruthless killer vanished, replaced by a man struck by a bolt of lightning from his past. "Come ti chiami, figlia mia?" "What is your name, my daughter?" he asked, his Italian flawless, commanding, and surprisingly gentle. "Julian," she replied in Italian. "Julian Ricci." "Ricci," he murmured. He took a spoon and tasted the soup. It was rich and warm. "A common name, but you possess an uncommon heart, Julian Ricci." "I'm just doing my job," she said, switching back to English as she saw Brad glaring at her from across the room. "Look, eat quickly. My manager. He's a difficult man. I don't want him to throw you out before you've finished." Lorenzo glanced over Julian's shoulder at Brad. He memorized Brad's face, the receding hairline, the cheap suit, the way he tapped his foot impatiently. Lorenzo filed that face away in the mental cabinet reserved for people who needed to be corrected. "He is a small man with a small amount of power," Lorenzo said, taking another spoonful. "Those are the most dangerous kind. They bite because they are afraid." "He's going to fire me," Julian admitted, her shoulders slumping. "But it's okay. I hate this place anyway." "Why do you stay?" "Money," she sighed. "Always money. My nonna. She's in a care home. The bills. You know how it is." Lorenzo nodded slowly. "I know how it is. Debt is a heavy chain." Suddenly, the front door of the restaurant burst open again. This time, it wasn't a frail old man. It was two men in long black leather trench coats. They were soaking wet, but they didn't care. They didn't wait for the hostess. They walked right past the podium, their eyes scanning the room with military precision. Julian felt a chill that had nothing to do with the open door. These men looked wrong. They looked like sharks swimming into a goldfish pond. One of them had a scar running down his cheek. The other kept his right hand buried deep inside his jacket. "Table for two?" Jessica, the hostess, squeaked, terrified. They ignored her. They were looking at faces. Lorenzo, sitting in the back corner, stiffened. He didn't turn around. He didn't look up. He stared into his soup bowl, his hand slowly moving beneath the table, gripping a steak knife he had palmed from the placemat. "Julian," Lorenzo whispered. His voice was no longer the voice of a grandfather. It was the voice of steel. "Listen to me carefully. Do not look at them. Do not react." "What?" Julian frowned, confused. "Who?" "The men who just entered. They are looking for me." Julian's heart stopped. She looked at the old, frail man, then at the two terrifying figures stalking through the dining room. "The police?" "No," Lorenzo said, a dark smirk playing on his lips. "Much worse." Brad, seeing the two men ignoring the hostess, marched up to them, his chest puffed out. "Excuse me, gentlemen. You cannot just walk in here and—" The man with the scar turned to Brad. He didn't yell. He simply grabbed Brad by the throat with one hand and shoved him against the wall hard enough to knock a painting loose. "We are looking for an old man," the scarred man said, his voice a low growl. "Grey hair, trench coat, looks like a beggar. Have you seen him?" The restaurant went deathly silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. The senator at table 4 dropped his fork. Brad, gasping for air, his feet dangling inches off the floor, couldn't speak. He was paralyzed with fear. Julian stood frozen at the back booth. She looked down at Lorenzo. He was gripping the steak knife so hard his knuckles were white. He looked up at her. "If you tell them I am here," Lorenzo whispered, "they will give you $10,000. Maybe more. They will kill me and you will be rich." It was a test, the ultimate test. The scarred man dropped Brad, who collapsed, coughing. The killer shouted to the room, "I said, has anyone seen an old man come in here?" His partner pulled a gun, a suppressed pistol. The diners screamed and ducked under the tables. "Anyone who speaks up gets to live," the gunman shouted. Julian looked at the terrified diners. She looked at Brad, who was wheezing on the floor. Brad looked up, his eyes darting toward the back corner. He opened his mouth. He was going to rat them out. He was going to point right at table 9. Julian made a split-second decision. She grabbed the pitcher of ice water from the table. She stepped out from the booth, blocking the view of Lorenzo. "Hey!" Julian shouted, her voice echoing through the terrified hall. The two gunmen turned toward her. The gun pointed straight at her chest. "He was here," Julian lied, pointing toward the kitchen swing doors on the opposite side of the room. "He ran through the kitchen, out the back alley. He stole some bread and ran." The gunman stared at her. "Are you sure?" "I saw him," Julian screamed, adding a touch of hysterical panic to her voice. "He pushed me. He went that way. Please don't shoot." Brad, still on the floor, tried to speak. "She's Julian accidentally kicked Brad in the ribs as she stumbled back, silencing him with a groan. The gunmen didn't wait. They sprinted toward the kitchen, bursting through the swing doors and out into the back alley, chasing a ghost. Julian stood there, shaking. The entire restaurant was hiding under tables. She turned back to the booth. Lorenzo Moretti was standing up now. He wasn't hunched. He stood tall. He placed the steak knife back on the table. He looked at Julian with an expression that could only be described as awe. "You lied for me," he said softly. You risked a bullet for a stranger." "You're not a stranger," Julian whispered, her adrenaline crashing, tears forming in her eyes. "You're a guest, and you're Italian." Lorenzo reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small, heavy gold ring with a black onyx stone. He grabbed Julian's hand and pressed it into her palm. "Keep this," he commanded. "Hide it. Do not show it to anyone yet." "What is it?" "Insurance," Lorenzo said. "I must go. Those men will realize the alley is empty in 2 minutes. When they come back, I will be gone. But they will come for you." "What?" Julian gasped. "Do not go home tonight," Lorenzo said, his intensity terrifying. "Go to the St. Regis Hotel. Ask for Mr. White. Show him the ring. Stay in the room. Do not leave until I come for you." "Who are you?" Julian asked, gripping the ring. Lorenzo buttoned his tattered coat, but he looked like a king in rags. "I am the man who owes you a life," he said. "And Lorenzo Moretti always pays his debts." He moved toward the side fire exit, moving with the speed of a man half his age. Before he pushed the bar to leave, he looked back at the terrified Brad, who was trying to stand up. "And you," Lorenzo said to Brad, pointing a finger that looked like a loaded weapon. "Pray to your God, because you just insulted the wrong family." Lorenzo vanished into the rainy night. Julian stood alone in the middle of the chaos, the gold ring heavy in her hand. Sirens were wailing in the distance. Brad was getting up, his face red with rage, looking at Julian. "You," Brad snarled, wiping blood from his lip. "You little lying witch! You're fired, and I'm telling the police you were an accomplice." Julian looked at the ring. She looked at the door where the gunman had gone. She realized her life as a waitress was over. The real story was just beginning. Julian didn't wait for Brad to finish his threat. The look in his eyes wasn't just anger, it was a frantic, sweaty desperation. Brad wasn't calling the police. She knew that look. It was the look of a man who owed money to bad people and saw a way to clear his debt. She sprinted to the employee lockers, her hands shaking so violently she could barely turn the combination dial. 122488. The locker popped open. She grabbed her purse, her cheap wool coat, and shoved the gold ring deep into her jeans pocket. It felt heavy, hot against her thigh, like a piece of burning coal. As she burst out of the locker room, she heard Brad's voice echoing from the manager's office. The door was ajar. Yes, Marco, listen to me," Brad was screaming into the phone. "The girl, the waitress, Julian Ricci, she lied. She sent your men the wrong way. Moretti was here. He was right here sitting in booth 9. Julian froze for a split second. Marco Vanzetti. Even a waitress who kept her head down knew that name. The Vanzettis were the new blood in New York. Flashy, violent, and without honor. They ran the docks in Red Hook and the high-stakes poker games in Tribeca. If Brad was calling Marco Vanzetti, Julian wasn't just fired, she was marked for death. She didn't go out the front door. She knew the hitmen, the scarred man and his silent partner, would be circling back from the alley any second. She ran toward the service elevator used for garbage disposal. It opened into the basement loading dock. She smashed the button. Come on. The elevator groaned and arrived. She threw herself inside just as the kitchen door swung open. She saw the scarred man storming back into the kitchen, his gun now openly displayed. He looked at Brad, who was pointing frantically toward the locker room. The doors closed. Julian descended into the darkness of the basement. When she hit the bottom, she ran past the dumpsters, slipping on a patch of grease, scrambling up the concrete ramp to 52nd Street. The rain was still coming down in sheets. She was instantly soaked, but the cold helped sharpen her senses. She needed a taxi, but it was raining in Manhattan during dinner rush. Getting a cab was harder than winning the lottery. She saw a yellow cab idling at a red light. She ran into the middle of the street, waving her arms, ignoring the honking horns of a delivery truck that nearly clipped her. She ripped the back door open and dove inside. "St. Regis Hotel!" she gasped, locking the door. "Go! Please, just go!" The driver, a Sikh man with a kind face, looked at her in the rearview mirror. "Miss, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just drive," Julian begged, looking out the back window. Through the rain-streaked glass, she saw the front doors of Le Ciel burst open. The two hitmen ran out onto the sidewalk, scanning the street. Brad was with them, pointing down the block. The traffic light turned green. The taxi lurched forward, merging into the sea of red taillights on Fifth Avenue. Julian slid down in the seat, clutching her chest. She was alive. But for how long? She pulled the ring out of her pocket. Under the passing streetlights, she examined it closely for the first time. It was heavy gold, old and scratched. The black onyx stone was engraved with a symbol, a double-headed hawk clutching a bundle of arrows. Inside the band, there was an inscription in Latin, Fidelitas ante sanguinem, fidelity before blood. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Don't go to your apartment. They are already there. Trust the ring." Julian dropped the phone on the seat. How did they get her number? How did they know where she lived? "Driver," she said, her voice trembling. "Can we go faster?" "Traffic is bad, miss. The president is in town or something. Gridlock everywhere." Julian looked out the window. They were passing the Rockefeller Center. The city looked beautiful and terrifying. She realized she had just walked out of her life. Her apron was still tied around her waist under her coat. She had $60 in her bank account, and she was holding the signet ring of the most powerful crime lord on the East Coast. They pulled up to the St. Regis on East 55th Street. It was a palace of limestone and gold light, a stark contrast to the grime of the street she had just fled. Doormen in uniforms that cost more than her car rushed to open the taxi door. Julian fumbled for cash, throwing a 20 at the driver. "Keep the change." She stepped out. She looked like a drowned rat. Her sneakers were muddy, her hair was a disaster, and she smelled of fear and rain. The doorman, a tall man with an immaculate posture, stepped in front of her, blocking the entrance. "Can I help you, miss?" His tone was polite, but firm. It was the same tone Brad used, the "you don't belong here" tone. "Deliveries are around the back." Julian swallowed hard. She remembered Lorenzo's words. "Ask for Mr. White. Show him the ring." "I need to see Mr. White," Julian said, trying to keep her voice steady. The doorman's expression didn't change. "We have no guest by that name, and no staff member by that name. Now, if you please move along, you are blocking the guests." "Please," Julian insisted. "Lorenzo sent me." The name hung in the air. The doorman blinked. His eyes darted left and right. He leaned in slightly. "Who?" Julian held up her hand. She turned the ring so the onyx stone faced out. The light from the hotel lobby caught the gold crest. The doorman's face went pale. The arrogance vanished instantly, replaced by a look of terrified respect. He straightened up, snapped his heels together, and bowed his head. "My apologies, Signorina," he whispered. He tapped his earpiece. "Code black in the lobby. Escort required immediately for a VIP." He stepped aside, holding the door open wide. "Right this way. Do not stop at the reception desk. Go straight to the elevators. Mr. Sterling, Mr. White, is already descending." Julian walked into the lobby. The chandeliers were blinding. The marble floors reflected her muddy sneakers. People stared, women in evening gowns, men in tuxedos. But this time, no one stopped her. Two large men in suits appeared from the shadows of the lobby bar and flanked her, walking perfectly in step with her. They weren't hotel security. They were soldiers. The elevator doors pinged open before she even pressed the button. A man stood inside. He was in his 50s, wearing a tuxedo, with silver hair slicked back. He looked like a British spy. "Miss Ricci," the man said, extending a hand. "I am Mr. Sterling. I believe you have something that belongs to my employer." Julian stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, shutting out the world. "Is he safe?" Julian asked. Mr. Sterling smiled, but it was a cold smile. "Mr. Moretti is unkillable, my dear. But tonight, you are the one we are worried about. Welcome to the sanctuary." The elevator didn't stop at the penthouse floor. It went higher, to a floor that wasn't listed on the control panel. Mr. Sterling used a key card that looked like a slab of black metal to activate the override. "You must be hungry," Sterling said pleasantly, as if they weren't fleeing a murder scene. "I have taken the liberty of ordering a ribeye, medium rare, and a change of clothes. Your size, I believe, is a 4? Julian stared at him. "How do you know my dress size?" "We are thorough," Sterling said. "Mr. Moretti values precision." The doors opened into a sprawling apartment that covered the entire roof of the building. It was modern, sleek, and filled with art that belonged in a museum. But Julian noticed the details that didn't belong in a hotel. The windows were thick, bulletproof glass. There were monitors on the wall showing camera feeds of every street corner for 3 blocks around the hotel. Men with earpieces and submachine guns slung under their jackets were pacing the hallway. This wasn't a hotel room, it was a war room. Sterling led her to a plush white sofa. "Please, sit. The clothes are in the bedroom to your left. Shower, change, burn the uniform. We cannot have you wearing the target." Julian felt a sudden wave of exhaustion. She went into the bathroom, a room made of marble and gold, and stripped off her wet clothes. She stood under the scalding hot water for 20 minutes, trying to wash away the feeling of Brad's eyes and the scarred man's gun. When she came out, wrapped in a plush robe, she found a set of clothes laid out on the bed. A black cashmere sweater, dark jeans, and leather boots. They fit perfectly. She returned to the living room. The steak was waiting, along with a glass of red wine. She ate voraciously. She hadn't realized how hungry fear made you. Sterling was standing by the window, looking out at the city. "Where is he?" Julian asked. "He is concluding some business," Sterling said. "He had to send a message." "What kind of message?" Sterling picked up a remote and turned on the large television on the wall. He flipped it to a local news channel. "Breaking news," the banner read. "Explosion at Midtown restaurant." Julian gasped, dropping her fork. On the screen, flames were shooting out of the windows of Le Ciel. Fire trucks were surrounding the building. The facade was destroyed. "No one was inside," Sterling said calmly. "Except perhaps for the rats." "Brad," Julian whispered. "Mr. Brad was found in the alleyway before the fire started," Sterling said, checking his watch. "Police are calling it a robbery gone wrong. Very tragic. He seems to have slipped and fallen on several bullets." Julian felt sick. She pushed the plate away. "You killed him?" "We didn't do anything, Miss Ricci," Sterling said, turning to her with a serious expression. "The Vanzetti brothers hold the lease on that building. They burned it to destroy evidence. Brad was their liability. They cleaned up their own mess. That is the nature of working for men like Marco Vanzetti. They consume their own." "And Lorenzo?" she asked. "Is he like them?" The front door of the penthouse opened. Lorenzo Moretti walked in. He looked nothing like the beggar from the restaurant. He was shaved, wearing a charcoal 3-piece Brioni suit that cost more than Julian's childhood home. He moved with the power of a locomotive, but his eyes were the same, dark, intelligent, and currently filled with a simmering rage. Behind him walked 3 men, capos. Julian recognized one from the newspapers, Salvatore Sal the Hammer Gravina, a man who supposedly ran the construction unions in Jersey. Lorenzo stopped when he saw Julian. His face softened instantly. He walked over to her, ignoring his lieutenants. "Julian," he said, taking her hands. "You are safe. Grazie a Dio." "You burned my workplace," Julian said, her voice shaking. "I did no such thing," Lorenzo said, sitting down opposite her. "Marco Vanzetti burned it. He thought I was still inside hiding in the cellar. He is a sloppy man who uses fire when he should use a scalpel." "They know who I am," Julian said. "Brad told them." "I know." Lorenzo nodded grimly. "Which is why you cannot go back to Queens. Not tonight. Not for a while." "My grandmother!" Julian shot up. "Nonna! They'll go after her to get to me." Lorenzo held up a hand. "Sit, Julian. Please." He snapped his fingers. Sterling handed him a tablet. Lorenzo passed it to Julian. On the screen was a live video feed. It showed a private hospital room. In the bed, sleeping peacefully, was Julian's grandmother. Sitting in a chair next to the door was a massive man reading a comic book. "Who is that?" Julian asked. "That is Luca. He is my nephew. He is very large and very bored, but he is the best bodyguard in the city. Your grandmother was moved to the Mount Sinai VIP wing an hour ago. The doctors are reviewing her medication. All expenses are paid." Julian stared at him. Tears welled up in her eyes. "Why? Why are you doing this? I just gave you soup." Lorenzo leaned forward. The room went silent. The capos watched their boss carefully. "You didn't just give me soup, Julian. You gave me my life. The men who came in, the Vanzetti brothers, they breached my security. My driver was paid off. My own consigliere, a man I trusted for 30 years, gave them my route." Lorenzo's face darkened. "I was alone, unarmed, freezing. If you had pointed me out, I would be dead. The balance of power in New York would have shifted to men who sell fentanyl to children and traffic women in shipping containers. You stopped that." He stood up and poured himself a drink. "Tonight, the 5 families are in chaos. Everyone thinks I am dead or running. They think the Vanzetti brothers have won." Lorenzo took a sip of whiskey. He turned to the window, looking at the burning reflection of the city. "Tomorrow morning, I am going to remind them why they call me the Ghost, and I need your help to do it." The morning sun hit the penthouse windows with blinding brightness. Julian hadn't slept. She had sat up listening to Lorenzo and his capos plot a war. She learned the truth about the underworld that night. She learned that the Vanzetti brothers, Marco and Luca, were backed by the Russian mob. They were trying to take over the sanitation contracts and the shipping ports. Lorenzo Moretti was the old guard. Violent, yes, but he had rules. No drugs in school zones, no hurting civilians. The Vanzettis had no rules. "They are holding a victory dinner tonight," Lorenzo said, pacing the room. He was looking at a map of Little Italy. "At Il Palazzo, their headquarters. They think I am ash in the ruins of that French restaurant." "So we hit them there?" Sal the Hammer asked, cracking his knuckles. "I can get 50 guys with Thompsons in the front door." "No," Lorenzo said sharply. "That is 1920s thinking, Sal. Il Palazzo is a fortress. Metal detectors, armed guards, police on the payroll outside. If we attack head-on, it's a bloodbath, and we lose." He turned to Julian. She was drinking coffee, feeling out of place in the room of predators. "We need to walk in," Lorenzo said. "We need someone they don't recognize, someone who can get close to Marco Vanzetti." Julian put her cup down. "Me?" "No," Lorenzo said immediately. "It is too dangerous." "They know my face," Julian said. "Brad told them. But they don't know me. They think I'm just a waitress who got scared and lied." She stood up. The fear from the night before was fading, replaced by a strange, cold anger. They had burned her restaurant. They had threatened her nonna. They had killed Brad. Even if she hated him, he didn't deserve to die like that. "You said Marco Vanzetti is celebrating," Julian said. "Does he like women?" Sal the Hammer snorted. "Does a bear sit in the woods? Marco thinks he's Casanova. He's always looking for new talent for his clubs." "Then let me go in," Julian said. "Absolutely not." Lorenzo slammed his hand on the table. "You are a civilian. I promise to protect you." "You can't protect me forever," Julian argued, surprised by her own boldness. "If you don't stop them tonight, they will keep coming. They will find Nonna. They will find me. I want my life back, Lorenzo, and the only way to get it back is to help you finish this." Lorenzo looked at her. He saw the fire in her eyes. It was the Sicilian blood, the stubbornness. "What is your plan?" Lorenzo asked quietly. "They are hiring staff for the party, right? Big party, last minute?" "Yes," Sterling interjected. "They called the agency this morning requesting 10 extra servers." "I'm a waitress," Julian said. "I'm the best waitress you've ever seen. I can carry a tray of champagne through a hurricane and not spill a drop. Get me in as a server. I get close to Marco. I drop the signal." "You come in." "The signal?" Lorenzo raised an eyebrow. "What do you need to get inside?" "We need the back door disabled," Sal said. "It's magnetic, controlled from the manager's office inside." "I can do that," Julian said. "Waitresses are invisible. We go everywhere. Kitchens, offices, storage rooms. No one looks at the help." Lorenzo stared at her for a long time. He twisted the ring on his finger, the replacement for the one he gave her. "If they recognize you—" "They saw a girl in a sloppy apron with wet hair in a dark restaurant for 10 seconds, Julian said. "Make me look different. Dress me up. They won't see Julian the waitress. They'll see whatever you want them to see." Lorenzo nodded slowly. He turned to Sterling. "Call the stylist. Get the makeup team. And get me a wire that fits in an earring." He looked back at Julian. "Tonight we dine at Il Palazzo, and we serve them a dish they will not forget." The transformation took 3 hours. The stylist, a woman who usually worked for Vogue but owed Lorenzo a favor, cut Julian's hair into a sharp, chic bob and dyed it a deep raven black. They applied makeup that highlighted her cheekbones and darkened her eyes. She put on the uniform provided by the catering agency, a short black skirt and a white crisp shirt, but Sterling made adjustments. A small microphone was sewn into the collar. A tiny earpiece, invisible to the naked eye, was placed in her ear canal. When Julian looked in the mirror, she didn't recognize herself. She looked dangerous. She looked like a femme fatale from a noir film. "Perfect," Lorenzo said, standing behind her. He handed her a small vial. "This is not poison. It is a powerful sedative. Liquid chloral hydrate. If Marco gets too close, you offer him a drink." "And the back door?" "There is a red button under the desk in the main office. Press it, and the magnetic locks on the loading bay disengage. My men will be waiting in a delivery truck outside." Lorenzo placed his hands on her shoulders. "Julian, if you feel unsafe, if you feel even a second of hesitation, you say the word storm into the mic. We will crash the front gate. It will be messy, but I will not let you die." "I'm ready," Julian said. "Remember," Lorenzo whispered, "you are not a waitress tonight. You are an actress playing the role of a waitress, and you are the most important person in the room." Il Palazzo was gaudy. It was a mansion in Long Island that the Vanzettis had bought and decorated with too much gold and too much velvet. The party was in full swing. Mobsters, politicians, and celebrities were mingling. Champagne flowed like water. The air was thick with cigar smoke and arrogance. Julian walked in with the catering team. She kept her head down, carrying a tray of hors d'oeuvres. "Champagne? Crab cake?" she offered, weaving through the crowd. She scanned the room. She saw him. Marco Vanzetti. He was sitting at the head table, laughing loudly. He was wearing a white suit, drinking from a crystal goblet. He looked like a Roman emperor. Sitting next to him was the scarred man, his bodyguard. Julian's heart hammered against her ribs. The scarred man was the one who had looked her in the eye at Le Ciel. If anyone would recognize her, it was him. "Steady," Lorenzo's voice came through her earpiece. He was in a van a mile away, listening. "Do not make eye contact with the bodyguard. Focus on Marco." Julian took a deep breath. She adjusted her tray and walked straight toward the lion's den. "More champagne, sir?" she asked, stepping up to the head table. Marco stopped laughing. He looked at Julian. His eyes raked over her body, ignoring her face. "Well, hello," Marco purred. "I haven't seen you before. What's your name, sweetheart?" "Bella," Julian lied smoothly, giving him a coy smile. "I'm new." "Bella," Marco grinned. "Beautiful. You stay close to this table, Bella. I get thirsty." The scarred man shifted in his seat. He looked at Julian. He narrowed his eyes. He tilted his head, studying her profile. Julian felt his gaze burning a hole in her skin. She didn't look at him. She poured champagne into Marco's glass. "You look familiar," the scarred man rumbled. Julian froze. "I have a common face," Julian said playfully. "Maybe you've seen me in your dreams?" The table erupted in laughter. Marco slapped the scarred man on the back. "She got you there, Tony. Stop scaring the girls." Tony, the scarred man, didn't laugh. He kept staring. "I need a refill on the vodka," Marco said, holding up his glass. "I'll get that from the bar, sir," Julian said. "No." Marco grabbed her wrist. His grip was wet and clammy. "Get the good stuff. In my office. Private stash. Top shelf. Go get the bottle of Louis Thursay Thuld." This was it. The office. "Of course, sir," Julian said. "Where is the office?" "Down the hall, last door on the left," Marco said. "Don't get lost." Julian pulled her wrist away gently and walked away. She felt Tony's eyes on her back every step of the way. "I'm moving to the office," she whispered into her collar. "Copy that," Lorenzo said. "We are moving into position. 2 minutes." Julian reached the hallway. It was empty. She walked quickly to the last door. She pushed it open. The office was lavish. Leather chairs, a mahogany desk, and there on the wall were the security monitors. She rushed to the desk. She crouched down, looking for the red button. There it was. A small panic button mounted under the lip of the desk. She reached for it. Click. The sound of a pistol hammer cocking echoed in the room. Julian froze. She turned around slowly. Tony, the scarred man, was standing in the doorway. He had followed her. He held a suppressed pistol pointed at her head. "I knew it," Tony said, a cruel smile spreading across his scarred face. "The waitress from the bistro. You cleaned up nice, but you still smell like fear." He stepped into the room and kicked the door shut. "Who sent you?" Tony demanded. "Is the old man alive?" Julian couldn't speak. She was trapped. "Say something," Tony shouted, raising the gun. Julian looked at the button under the desk. It was 3 feet away. She would never reach it before he shot her. "Storm," she whispered. "Storm, Storm." "He can't help you," Tony laughed. "Nobody can help you." He squeezed the trigger. Click. The sound echoed in the small office like a thunderclap. It wasn't the sound of a bullet firing. It was the dry, metallic snap of a firing pin hitting a dud primer. Tony stared at his gun in disbelief. He racked the slide frantically to clear the jam. "Cheap Russian crap," he snarled. That split second of mechanical failure was the only chance Julian would ever get. She didn't scream. She didn't freeze. She grabbed the heavy crystal bottle of Louis XIII's cognac from the desk, a bottle worth $3,000, and swung it with all the desperate strength she possessed. The heavy crystal connected with Tony's temple with a sickening crunch. The bottle didn't break, but Tony did. His eyes rolled back, and he crumpled to the floor, the gun sliding from his hand. Julian didn't wait to see if he was breathing. She threw herself under the mahogany desk and slammed her hand against the red panic button. Clang. Somewhere deep in the bowels of the mansion, heavy magnetic locks disengaged. "Door is open!" Julian screamed into her microphone. "I'm in the office. Tony is down." "Get down, Julian!" Lorenzo's voice roared in her ear. "Cover your ears." The glass window of the office shattered inward as a flash-bang grenade was tossed from the garden balcony. Boom! The room filled with blinding white light and a deafening ringing sound. Julian curled into a ball under the desk, shielding her head. She heard the heavy thud of boots hitting the floor. "Secure! Room clear!" a voice shouted. Julian felt a hand on her shoulder. She flinched, expecting Tony, but when she looked up, she saw a man in tactical gear wearing a balaclava. He pulled it up. It was Luca, the nephew from the hospital. "You did good, little cousin." Luca grinned, helping her up. "Now stay here. Uncle wants a word with the host." Outside in the main ballroom, the party had turned into a nightmare for the Vanzetti crew. The waiters and bus boys who had been circulating for the last hour suddenly drew weapons. The back loading bay doors flew open, and Sal the Hammer led a phalanx of 20 men into the hall. The music cut out. The guests screamed and dropped to the floor. Marco Vanzetti stood at the head table, overturning it to use as a shield. He pulled a gold-plated pistol. "Kill them! Kill them all!" he screamed at his men. But his men were confused, outgunned, and terrified. They weren't fighting police. They were fighting the ghosts of the old regime. Then, the main double doors of the ballroom swung open. Lorenzo Moretti walked in. He held no weapon. He walked slowly, calmly, through the center of the room. The firefight seemed to pause around him. Marco Vanzetti's eyes bulged. He looked like he was seeing a demon. "You're dead," Marco whispered. "I burned you." "You burned a building, Marco," Lorenzo said, his voice carrying through the silent hall. "You cannot burn a legacy." Lorenzo stopped 10 feet from Marco. He looked at the trembling mob boss with pure disgust. "You broke the rules," Lorenzo said. "You brought noise to the city. You threatened civilians. You tried to kill a woman who only offered you champagne." "She's a rat!" Marco screamed, raising his gun. Before Marco could aim, a single shot rang out. Marco howled, dropping his gun. He clutched his right hand, which was now a ruin of red. Julian stood at the entrance of the hallway, flanked by Luca. She wasn't holding a gun. She was pointing. Beside her, Sterling lowered his smoking pistol. "She is not a rat," Lorenzo said, walking up to the whimpering Marco. "She is the only person in this room with honor." Lorenzo signaled to Sal. "Take him. The police will find him tied to the lamp-post outside the precinct with a confession note for the restaurant fire and the port murders. He will spend the rest of his life in a cage." Lorenzo turned to the room full of terrified guests and Vanzetti soldiers who had dropped their weapons. "The Vanzetti family is dissolved," Lorenzo announced. "Go home. If I see any of you in my city again, you will not be as lucky as Marco." He walked over to Julian. She was shaking, the adrenaline finally leaving her system. He took off his suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders. "The car is waiting," Lorenzo said softly. Let's go get your grandmother. 6 months later. The sun was shining on Central Park, a stark contrast to the storm that had started it all. Julian Ricci stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the newly renovated building on 52nd Street. The charred remains of Le Ciel were gone. In its place was something warmer, more inviting. The facade was rustic stone, and the flower boxes were overflowing with basil and rosemary. The sign above the door was hand-painted in gold leaf, Il Rifugio, the shelter. It looks good, a voice said behind her. Julian turned. Lorenzo Moretti was standing there. He looked older, perhaps a bit more tired, but he was smiling. He wasn't wearing a suit today. He wore a comfortable wool sweater and a flat cap. He looked like a grandfather. The contractor finished early, Julian said. Sal made sure of it. Sal can be very persuasive with plumbers, Lorenzo chuckled. He handed her a thick envelope. The deed. Free and clear. The building, the land, the business. It is all in your name, Julian. Julian took the envelope. It felt heavy, but not like a burden. I can't accept this, Lorenzo. It's too much. I just wanted a job. You don't have a job, Lorenzo corrected her. You have a legacy. You saved my life. You helped me clean the city of a disease. This isn't payment. It's an investment. He pointed to the window. Inside, staff were setting tables. Julian saw Jessica, the hostess who had been too scared to speak up that night, arranging flowers. Jessica waved happily through the glass. Julian had hired her as the general manager. You have the heart of a lioness, Julian, Lorenzo said. But you belong in the light, not in the shadows with me. This place, it will be a sanctuary. Good food, good wine, no gunmen, no brads. Julian laughed. Definitely no brads. I will come by for the grand opening, Lorenzo said, stepping back toward his car where Luca was waiting. I expect the best table. Table 9, Julian smiled. In the back corner, reserved forever. Lorenzo tipped his cap. Ciao, Donna Julian. Ciao, Don Lorenzo. As the black car pulled away, disappearing into the New York traffic, Julian looked back at her restaurant. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She wasn't a victim. She walked to the front door, unlocked it, and flipped the sign from close to open. A couple walked up, looking at the menu. Excuse me, the man asked. Are you open for lunch? Julian smiled, the same warm smile that had saved a life in the rain 6 months ago. Yes, she said. Welcome to Il Rifugio. Come in out of the cold. And that is how a single bowl of soup and a few words of kindness brought down a crime empire. It just goes to show you never know who you're talking to. So it pays to be kind, or at least it pays to know Italian. If you enjoyed this story and want more dramatic tales of betrayal, revenge, and redemption, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. Subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss a part. And let me know in the comments, if you were Julian, would you have hidden the Mafia boss or turned him in for the reward? I'll see you in the next video. Stay safe out there.